We will be speaking in Spanish. Can you hear the interpreter? Valeria, welcome. Has a PhD in history from the University of Wisconsin. She has a master's degree in international studies from the University of Santiago, Chile, and also a degree in history from the Catholic University of Chile. And since 2017, she has been a professor and is at the helm of a degree program at the Diego Portales University. She has authored many works which provide a different perspective on the reality in Chile. She has written about silence and and forgetting in progressive Chilean Jews, and also the divided memory about Jews in Chile, the building of a historical memory, and also the 50th anniversary of the Jewish community. There's also another one about the limits of social integration and Jewish history, and also the voices of non-affiliated Jews in Chile. It All of her works are extremely interesting, and I believe that today we will be afforded the opportunity to enjoy her presentation. What we have seen throughout this series of lectures is that there is a diversity of cases at the country level, some at the regional level, some at the global level. But aside from that, there are points in common about within the speakers, among the speakers, such as collective memory, and our next our colleague who will soon will be with us, Betty Mendlovich, will be speaking about that. So there are points in common between the speakers. So it's a benefit. It's an additional benefit to creating a community that talks to each other, which is very important. And once again, it's I'd like to tell you about the possibility of having our presentations, and we're finding a way to just to do that, to see how and when that they might be published in English in the academic press. And ISGAP has offered to do that for us. So without further ado, I will now give the floor to Valeria, and I'd like to welcome all of you today. Valeria, the floor is yours. First of all, let me thank you, Judith, for inviting me today. About 3 years ago, you invited me as well when you organized a series of talks about anti-Semitism in Latin America. And I really took it upon myself to come up with a different version of my presentation for this. For this series, we work on historical issues, but the juncture has changed, and anti-Semitism has taken on a new face in different places around the world. What we see as anti-Semitism and how it expresses itself. So I'd like to start with an anecdote, something that happened and that is connected in some way to what Judith just said. The last speaker of the series is Michelle Viviorca, right? Right, that's correct. And I wonder whether we can extend it a little bit. The last two sessions, that is, to have a concluding roundtable discussion. But you're right, Michelle is one of the speakers. Michelle Viviorca was in Chile in October 2023. She was giving a few lectures at the Diego Portales University, which is where I work. On that Tuesday or Thursday after the October 7th attacks, I took my students to listen to her lecture about how to move on after terror, how to move on with your life, basically. And I don't know whether it was October 10th or 12th, 2023. And then one student asked a question. She said, how do you face the actions that will be taken by the state of Israel against Gaza? And in some way, this question has really resounded with me because Viviorka works on many issues, including anti Semitism, answered it very well. First of all, she said, they were still looking at what was going on. They were still looking into what was going on and the magnitude of what happened on October 7th. And a war had been declared. There were some bombings, but they did not have the actual dimensions of what had happened. And space had to be provided for those who went through October 7th and suffered through October 7th, had the chance to process what was going on and not just point a finger at Israel for everything that was happening. And I think that this is something that you will see once and again in my lecture, because part of what I want to show you here is one of the expressions of anti Semitism, not the sole expression, and that is to assume that, first of all, Jews support the state of Israel and its government as if it were one thing, not drawing a difference between Jews and Zionism, and also characterizing Zionism as something negative in and of itself, uh, turning Zionism into an absolute evil as a concept and not bearing in mind that Zionism was a national liberation movement, as is the case in many other places around the world. I'm sharing my screen, so I'd like to tell you a bit about the situation in Chile. 4 weeks ago, there was a news report by a news channel, D News in Chile, and this story was based on the report on anti Semitism that was issued by the Anti Defamation League. According to that report, 45% of Chileans have exhibit anti Semitic behaviors. Within the Latin American spectrum, that is a pretty low percentage when compared to other countries. However, one point that has stood out and that was identified by the ADL and the Latin American Jewish Congress is that a setting where we see these attitudes is online, online comments. So this is a picture, a snapshot of the news story, and this is a screenshot of some of the comments. And the comments were, so there is concern about the rise in anti-Semitism in Chile. So people ask, ironically, I wonder why. There are many Palestinians in Chile. And some of them said, isn't it because of their usury practices? And others said, I don't believe your surveys. And another one said, because there are so many Palestinians, there is an attitude of towards supporting Palestine, and that D News is very pro-Israel. And let me use my pointer here, is very pro-Israel. So I don't know what their editorial line is in Latin America, but I've seen some pieces that are pretty biased, and I'm not surprised to see this. So when they're so in response to concerns about anti-Semitism, what we see is anti-Semitism. So about the survey, 45% are anti Semitic, and that went up since the last time in 2014 when that survey was carried out. So there is a gender bias. Women are more anti-Semitic than men. And in terms of age, It's cross-cutting and basically the same across the board, and it's more prominent in those who have only primary and secondary education. Those who have post-secondary education or higher education are less anti-Semitic, and 61% have a favorable opinion of Jews. However, there's still this idea that they're more loyal to Israel than to Chile, and that most Chileans agree that Jews do not care about anything that happens outside of their community, and they usually think that they're better than others. And and this is something that recurs in the anti-Jewish context. So let's take a look at an overview of the situation in Chile. So around the world, there are about 14, 15, 16 million Jews. This is from 2010. In Latin America, as of 2018, the largest Jewish community is Argentina, followed by Brazil. And then there are smaller to medium-sized communities, Uruguay, Chile, and then smaller, such as Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, and some very small, such Paraguay, Ecuador, and Bolivia. Within the setting, what do we see in Chile? The Jewish population came to Chile in the late 19th century and has grown since the 1940s with the arrival of immigrants in the post World War II period. And they're basically based in Santiago. There's a small community in Valparaiso, and there are small groups of Jews who are not really communities in Arica, Iquique, Copiapó, La Serena, Coquimbo, Temuco, Puerto Montt. And as for synagogues, there's one in Concepción, Viña del Mar, Temuco, and some other very, very small communities, by the way. In terms of organization, in 1940, the representative committee was created to represent the various groups of Jews. Uh, uh, Vis-a-vis the authorities. And Chile recognized Israel 1949. There was a left-wing movement between the 30s and the 60s, and there was a large immigration of Jews under Allende and then under Pinochet during the dictatorship. And then we went from about 30,000 Jews in 1970s, where there were 10 million people living in Chile, to 18 to 20,000 Jews in a population of 18 to 20 million since 2018 and up to today. In Santiago, which is where most of the Jewish population is based in Chile, they're mostly in the downtown area and what we call the eastern neighborhood, Barrio Oriente, which is where it's an upscale neighborhood. The school is where my pointer is, and that's why there's a large, somewhat large Jewish population here. So this map comes from Naim Bro. He's a sociologist who set out to find where some of the last names dwelled. And so it's a very specific heat map that places the population in the city, and he's done this with other identifiable last names. Population, Jewish population, total population in Chile. Mm, and then I've talked about this before, so let's skip this, please. So we have a Jewish life, which is quite diverse, with synagogues, a Jewish school, there's a religious school, There's one in Viña del Mar. There's a cemetery in Santiago and another one in Valparaíso. We also have a country club. We call it a stadium here in Chile, which is the Maccabi Club. And we have two nursing homes. This one was created in 1954. And we also have other institutions that are connected with Chilean life, such as B'nai B'rith. This is an interreligious Seder, the Chilean Jewish Archive, which seeks to preserve the memory of Chilean Jewry, and also other venues of connection between public life in Chile and the Jewish community, such as the commemoration or the celebration of Hanukkah at the Presidential Palace and the International Holocaust Memorial Day, which has been celebrated since 2008 at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We can talk about these two these two elements. The International Holocaust Memorial Day is held at the Presidential Palace, and the celebration of Hanukkah at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have become controversial on an issue. So please remind me if I don't bring this up myself with your questions. So this is an overview of Jewish life in Chile, which is quite diverse. It's multifaceted, as is the case for any community the size of the Jewish community in Chile. So now let's talk about anti-Semitism. I decided to focus on this and not on Jewish life in general, because this is the issue that I was asked to talk about today. So I was wondering how much we can say about public expressions of anti-Semitism and why we see these, where we see these expressions. Generally speaking, anti Semitism is seen at times of crisis or key junctures in a society. Currently, anti Semitism is more openly expressed than in everyday life. It's at times or junctures of crisis that happens, because times of crisis lend a voice to sectors that at other times might not feel comfortable expressing those views. So what we see in 2025 in part is the existence of a global crisis that has allowed for these opportunities to be seized by people who have anti Semitic views. And this is seen in universities, um, in governments, social media. Social media have been used as a channel to express hate speech and thought in general, and anti Semitism in particular. Also, misogynistic and racist thoughts are expressed on social media. And anti Semitism is part of this hate speech and racist thought, although sometimes they're conceived as being completely separate. And this is an issue that I hope to be able to broach later. At times of crisis, and so we can talk about this in Chile when we had those social protests in 2019. After those protests, there were several constituent assemblies that did not lead to the enactment of a new constitution. But during those protests that sought to make changes to the Constitution, groups emerged using Nazi symbols, clearly Nazi symbols, and the Nazi salute, and fuck you Israel, as you can see, swastikas. And this symbol is an extreme right symbol that emerged under Salvador Allende, called Patria y Libertad, so country and freedom. In 2020, these groups expressed a nationalistic, anti-communist, and anti-Semitic position. These groups are the ones that speak against the 2030 agenda of the UN because they feel that it's a global problem. However, these were not the only instances where there were outbursts of anti Semitism or expressions that lent support to language, people, or ideas that can be construed as anti Semitic. El Mercurio, a national newspaper, some people would say that it's the main newspaper in the country. In October 2021, there was a news report, a full page story. This is a very large print newspaper about Hermann Goering, Hitler's successor. And it explained how important he was and minimizing and dismissing the importance of the fact that he was a Nazi and that he was also a defendant at Nuremberg. In response to this news story, the Jewish community issued a condemnation, and so did the German embassy. And the presidential candidate under what was called La Nueva Mayoría at the time, she's a provost, a university provost, made a call for solidarity, expressions of solidarity towards the Jewish community. A couple of weeks later, however, or actually almost a year later, what we see is that El Mercurio and La Tercera start selling this. They have this book club, and they start selling figurines of World War II soldiers, and they have an Unter, Untersturmführer, a lieutenant of the SS, for sale. And this was sold throughout Latin America. And in Latin America, there were different expressions of positions about which figurines could be sold. In Argentina, it was said that the Germans could not be sold. In Uruguay, it said that all of them were could be sold. And in Chile, the only ones that were censored were the Soviet soldiers. There was no problem with selling these figurines of the SS. And here is where we have a new communique by the German embassy regretting the sale of these figurines representing SS soldiers who were at the forefront of the Nazi regime and committed crimes against humanity. This is not just a regular Wehrmacht soldier. He's not a German soldier, any old German soldier, but rather a commander, an SS commander. And what they did specifically was be in charge of extermination camps, death camps, and they were being sold on the market freely. There was something else that came out in July 2022. So it was this cartoon, which is under the statement by the German embassy. This is a caricature that um, has been used since the MAGA movement was emerged, having to do with paranoid and conspiratorial ideas about the role of Jews, and using this caricature saying to symbolize a Jew as someone who's a miser, and also it's the advertising of for a liquor store in Valparaiso. So what they're using is massively are these symbols, these this language, these images in public space, and how come this is happening and being allowed, and with the acquiescence of a national newspaper, and also the use of social media to criticize these actions. This is criticism by an academic from the Catholic University, and saying that by 3,000 pesos is how much you have to pay for this figurine. That's $3, basically. And here are the comments in response to his boss. Oh, for very little, you can also get an easy to assemble gas chamber to kill small animals. Or and then others say, if El Mercurio were Jewish, they would charge $15 regardless of what they were selling. And others saying, oh, and the owners of El Mercurio are Jews. Oh, no Volkswagen for you. And don't say any words in German because that would be hate speech. And SCW means it has a specific meaning as well. And also, these are just examples of how posts on social media can further fuel hate speech. It's not the first time that El Mercurio publishes this type of story with anti Semitic elements. This is another story from 2001 about the future of Nazism in Chile, based on an event that took place on September 5th, 1938, which was the killing of workers where young Chilean Nazis were murdered by the government. So what we have here are actions and speech and events that speak of anti-Semitism on the media and on social media. Now I will move on to a topic that I believe is more complex, and that is a situation where the government leader, and I'm talking about President Boric, who has spoken and sometimes decided not to speak in ways that show a bias against Israel and Jews that may be construed as anti-Semitic by many. And I decided that this was going to be called Boric's statements and silences. Ever since he took office, he has clashed with the Israeli embassy and the local Jewish community. The president, at some point in June 2024, said, I've had a very clear and adamant position about the situation in Gaza. The conflict in Gaza is a massacre that needs to stop. And we have joined in the application submitted by South Africa before the International Court of Justice. And we have pointed at Netanyahu and his war ministers and the two main leaders of Hamas as war criminals. And I have no doubt whatsoever as to how we should act as a country vis-a-vis this conflict. And this has been Boric's position since October 7th and up to this date. There are certain elements that point to certain selective affinities by the president. And this is based on his attendance at different events. In last Christmas, he went to what is called the Palestinian Christmas, and he made a speech on solidarity and solidarity towards those who are involved in conflict. He got two presents. One of them was this drawing about solidarity between Chile and Palestine. And the second gift were two T-shirts. I couldn't find a picture of them, but these were two T-shirts for, I mean, baby size, because he's going to have a baby in a couple of months. And there were two of them. One of them was a watermelon representing the Israeli and Palestinian map. And the other one was a small T-shirt depicting the Palestinian club. So if this per se doesn't mean that there is anti-Semitism or anti-Zionism involved. However, this stands in stark contrast to the attitude that was expressed by the president about Israel and the Jews. First of all, President Boric has at no time met with the local Jewish community. The person we see here is Ariela Agostin, former president of the Jewish community up until last March. And she was very clear in saying that On many occasions, they had tried to meet with the president, but the president was not willing to meet. And when I talked about Hanukkah at the presidential palace, out of the three times that this happened in under his administration, he only attended once. He decided not to attend on the remaining two celebrations. And as for the celebration of Holocaust Memorial Day at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the attitude hasn't been very proactive in terms of holding it there under this administration. However, President Boric was very quick to mention or accuse Israel of things on social media. This was his latest tweet on March 18th about the ceasefire. He said, I mean, this is the Chilean president tweeted that the government of Israel reaffirms its criminal vocation and its will to destroy the Palestinian uh, people by unilaterally violating the ceasefire and murdering Gazan women and children, jackals who would be despised by jackals. We reaffirm our support for the Palestinian people and their demand for autodetermination. Pablo Neruda, in one of his poems talking about Spain, speaks of jackals as a symbolic figure. And President Boric has used these metaphors several times when referring to different issues. So he uses metaphors by Chilean poets. But March 2025 is not first instance. It's not the first instance when we see this type of statement by the Chilean president. On February 5th of this year, when Trump announced his plan, he said Palestine for Palestinians without foreign invasions, colonies, or displaced peoples, two sovereign nations with internationally recognized frontiers. To the UN, he said, I will not choose between the terrorism of Hamas and the genocidal conduct of Israel. And that's September 2024. In December 2024, Boric said that Netanyahu was a war criminal and condemned the genocide in Gaza in April 2024. Once again, he said, we must be indignant in the face of the barbaric acts committed in Gaza. And in April, once again, same tweet, over 34,000 murdered. And on the weekend, there was he spoke about a pregnant woman whose baby was rescued. And he said, also that some people justify Netanyahu's genocidal actions, and the Palestinian community, of course, retweeted and thanked him. And then there was a direct conversation with Mahmoud Abbas that he had in October 2023 to speak of his deep concern about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. This is, however, not the first time that Boric spoke about this. When he was a member of parliament, he had once and again expressed his support of Palestinians. And this is the tweet that we see below, which is rather ironic. It says Israeli companies offer solutions to facilitate life, to make life easier for people. And he said they could start with Palestine by withdrawing from the occupied territories. Boric made a decision to recall the Chilean ambassador from Israel. So it means that he downgraded the relations between countries, and that was done on October 31st, 2023, at the beginning of the land operations. And the Chilean ambassador to Israel hasn't come back yet. You know, Jorge Carvajal was there. He went back to Chile, and So the deputy chief of mission and others remained, but they do not have an ambassador to date, a Chilean ambassador to Israel. And this is in stark contrast to the ways that Boric has referred to the October 7th attacks. A member of parliament, Carmen Hertz, who is close to the Jewish world because of her first husband, but she's communist. She's a communist, and she has very clear positions about human rights. She said on October 8th, she said that the fact that we believe that the Palestinian cause is fair does not mean that we do not condemn categorically, or relativize any of the acts uh, of rape, kidnapping, or killings of Israeli civilians carried out by Hamas. And so the first comment made by Boric was this: I agree 100%. That's all he said. A president who usually is very outspoken on social media just typed in a very, very short message by retweeting what somebody else said. So there's something afoot. And we're not just talking about the country's president that has been supportive of the Palestinian cause. Can you see my PowerPoint? I can't. Apparently, we lost the PowerPoint presentation. Here it is again. Can you see my PowerPoint presentation? Mm, we can't. I am sorry to interrupt, but I think, okay, here it is. So we are nearing the end of this presentation so that we can have some time for questions and answers. These are Congress members in Chile in 2014 and 2018. Um, and this is about the different conflicts in Gaza. And on October 9th, 2024, there was an event called 1 Year of Genocide, 76 Years of Suffering. And this is at the National Congress. And what we've seen, that's by the government, but there's a dispute between the Jewish community and the Palestinian community where both of them express their views. And their statements are meant to incite others to speak, and they say, I have condemned what you've said, or what the Netanyahu government does in Gaza, and you have condemned what Hamas has said. And so it's a tit for tat, so to speak. So rallies in Chile have been ongoing. So this is a protest at the Catholic University. There were several at the university. This was in 2024, by the way. And there was uh, between a sit-in between May and June of 2024 at the University of Chile. This is a drawing by an artist uh, between a Russian and a U.S. This is based on a drawing depicting the U.S. and the Russian president. And so what they show here is Netanyahu kissing the president of the university, and it provides some figures about displaced persons and dead people, etc. These camps were meant to stop every single relationship between Israeli universities and the University of Chile, and that includes the Chaim Weizmann Institute, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, the University of Haifa, and others, and Bar-Ilan, for example. So these were agreements that were basically dormant. However, a call was made for these agreements to be rescinded. And the mural was by Dmitry Vrubel from 1990. And it depicted Brezhnev and Honecker, not a U.S. president. And this is an open letter calling on young Jews. Call so um, not to make a distinction between the defending crimes and committing crimes, and that that Jews should call for justice and for just peace, and that we should not import the conflict, that these are is an argument that cannot be silenced anymore. And the idea is to impose a vision of what Zionism is about, and inciting Jews to take action, the action that Palestinians want regarding the conflict. In other words, this is something similar to what is actually underway in U.S. universities. At U.S. universities, where it said, there are these Jews who reject Israel and Zionism. These are good Jews. The other Jews are bad Jews, so to speak, because they're Zionists. That's what they posit. And this these discourse is now leading to certain actions that have been seen at the universities in our country. Vandalization of synagogues since October 7th, two synagogues here in Santiago. The second one is in the downtown area in the Mata neighborhood, and also small synagogues in Concepcion and others. And one interesting thing about the current Palestinian movement is that there is a great deal of poster art. So we have some artists, such as Mono Guzman, who authored this one to the right. Sorry, Mono Gonzalez. He is one of the best known, most famous poster artists in our country. And then there's something else at play. The Palestinian cause has begun to appear in every uh, demand locally in universities, trade unions. There was even a strike at Starbucks, and Starbucks has nothing to do with Israel, but still there was a Palestinian flag there. And here it says that Starbucks finances genocide and exploits its workers. So what we see is the use of intersectionality and an increase in the use of certain stereotypes and language, anti-Zionist language, that ends up becoming anti-Semitism. Finally, a couple of weeks ago, actually a week ago, the Jewish community submitted a complaint against an artist, Natalia Valdebenito, uh, with hundreds of thousands of followers, who made a statement against a Jewish journalist who had been very outspoken about what has been happening since October 7th, 2023, Natalia Pulitzer, and and she said, you're Jewish, Patricia Politzer said, I admire your work, and I respect you, but I have nothing to do with the war. What I'm trying to promote is peace. There's nothing, uh, and Natalia said, I don't. criticize you, but I see that you are blind. I see you turn a blind eye to the deaths that occur day in and day out. Of course, this is not justice, and I am not anti-Semitic. She says, I'm Jewish, but your words don't reach me. You don't, and I've spent more nights awake because of this strategy than you have, says Patricia Politzer. So she said, I used to read your work after Gaza. I don't respect you anymore. And this is something that we see often in several um, public figures who are Jewish. Patricia Politzer has been working in the media for over 50 years. She is a well-respected journalist. She received the National Award for Journalism, the Frenlich Award, and she denounced the dictatorship. She worked during the dictatorship, and she was part of the first constituent process in 2020 since 2021. So she is well respected and she has a reputation, and she has been quite adamant in criticizing Hamas and the events of October 7th. So it's quite surprising to see these comments leveled at her personally. And I decided not to speak about a political figure who has been very influential in our country, Daniel Jaue, but I don't want to talk about him. He is a former mayor of a municipality where many Palestinians and Arabs have taken residence, Recoleta, but it also includes several Jews. And he has been quite anti Semitic in his comments. I mean, that has been the case always, but especially since 2021 during the electoral campaign that led to the election of Boric. And I'll stop here so that you can ask your questions. All right, thank you so much. Will you stop sharing your screen maybe so that we can all see each other? And thank you. And without a doubt, we always have to deal with the issue of time, which is of the essence. But I would like to start this conversation with two comments. Number one, bearing in mind many of the lectures that we've had thus far, and also trying to draw a parallel between the timelines, we see common expressions across the region and that also permeate the United States or North America and even across the Atlantic into Europe. So, what you just said about Chile is very interesting, Valeria, because from the very beginning, right after October 7th, Chile and the print shops generated flyers, made flyers that even reached Mexico and going through all of the countries in between. This is very interesting. That then number two, also in the first statements made in Chile, there was a call at the universities for going out into the streets to rallies. But what happens is seen not only in crowds and the public, but also a president such as Boric. And an interesting case that we'll be able to talk about later is maybe to draw a comparison between Chile, Mexico, and Argentina, where the current administrations are playing a major role. And as you said, the fact that there is a large Palestinian population has a major bearing. Vandalizing public spaces and others are something that we also see in the United States and European countries, right? Where we see all of these issues of anti Semitism and anti Zionism take on even greater importance. So, one fundamentally important thing that I'd like to bring up about what you said is the following. There were um, demands by trade unions or workers groups or also even university unions um, have their own maybe legitimate quote unquote progressive demands, but they include demands not only in terms of solidarity with the Palestinian cause, but also um, delegitimizing the state of Israel and condemning the state of Israel. With that said, and many other elements that might be at play, I'd like to uh, open the floor for questions, including the question that Valeria herself asked us to pose if she had no time to broach the topic in her own presentation. I wonder whether there are any questions. Please do not hesitate. Please go ahead. Feel free to speak. Rosaline, Florinda, Sergio, Betty, Denise, whoever wants to take the floor, please go ahead. It, oh, if I may, Sergio raised his hand. Sergio, go ahead. Floor is yours. Thank you and good afternoon from Jerusalem. I have two questions. Number one, about the patterns of anti Semitism, which, by the way, includes several historical currents and trends and religious and political content. The question is, aside from this discourse of Israel genocide and Zionism, um, are there other aspects in terms of, let's say, the Catholic Church in a discussion by the left hand discussion focused on classical, more specific, uh, classic left wing issues or right wing, and also since I'm a demographist, I wonder whether this negative pressure has an effect on the stability of the community. In other words, the intent maybe to go find other horizons and maybe even leave the country. That's something that we're always interested to know about all countries around the world. And thank you for that very interesting presentation, by the way. Sure. Shall we take another question or shall I answer? I don't see any other hands raised. So I think that Rosalie wants to ask something. No, no, no. Thank you. And congratulations, Valeria, for opening our eyes to what has been happening in Chile and Judith, as you said, and how this is disseminated throughout Latin America and into Europe as well. What I'm interested in finding out, and this has to do with Sergio's question, to what extent does the Chilean Jewish community find itself in a position to respond to all of these changing patterns? And if it has done so, how? Publicly and privately. I wonder whether there are specific connections that can be leveraged to fight this trend in the informal setting, in an informal setting, and what has been done in more formal settings, because I assume this is a very difficult situation to handle for a small community faced with a much larger Palestinian community. Florinda has raised her hand. If I may add to what Rosalie said, has anything been done at the Jewish school to try and help young people who are faced with this tidal wave of hate and discrimination. Thank you for your questions, and I'll try to answer them very quickly, if I can. Traditional anti-Semitic patterns. Though the Catholic Church, the Archbishop of Santiago is of Palestinian descent, so he's very much pro or for that anti and Israel and pro-Palestinian discourse. One trend that we've seen globally, Professor de la Pergola, is that the right in Chile takes Israel and Hezbollah and terrorist groups as part of their banner to attack the left. So this was seen yesterday when there was a vote promoted by a group of the far right group in Chile, the Republicans they're called. They made a proposal to declare the actions of Hezbollah in Chile illegal. That's why I said Hezbollah. And it was approved. But the Communist Party, however, rejected it en bloc. It's not because they're against Hezbollah or not. It's just because it was brought up by that group, that far right group. And this year there will be elections in Chile. So election years are years where you see these contentious issues at play and being used. Anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, the Jews, everything having involving the government is used by the opposition, in this case, as a tool against the government. It's not that the right is no longer anti-Semitic. It's just that you don't see it as much at this point. And there's another trend that we see also with Donald Trump. It's not that Donald Trump is not anti-Semitic. It's just that he's pro-Israel, but he is hurting North American or the U.S. Jewry. So at this point, what is good for Israel is not necessarily good for the Jews in other countries. And if we take into account and look at what Trump is saying in his discourse, it's not good for Israel either. On the other hand, we've seen that there has been, since Boris' election, there has been an uptick in Aliyah, but discrete. If it was 50 people a year, now it's 60 or 70 or 80 or maybe up to 100 max. But there's also the opposite movement. Since October 7th, Chileans came from Israel to the community. People who lived in southern Israel, in the kibbutzim, on kibbutzim, people with small children. And I'm saying this because my daughter is in third grade, so she's 9 years old. And she has several new Israeli classmates who speak no Spanish at all. And that happened in other classes as well. So some come and some go, looking for different things probably. And in terms of the community, what we see is that um, there is a movement within the Jewish community, quite traditional, to create contacts, to make requests, to publish letters, which were not very operational, so to speak. The results have not been positive, as I just showed you in my presentation. There was no response to those requests either. In other words, it's not about there being a new way of doing it. I mean, there's a new way to do politics, and the Jewish community has not updated its ways of doing politics, and they don't know what Jews can do in terms of politics. And how to be a Jew in the public setting. As individuals, they may accept it, but they don't understand why Jews have to be listened to or met with. And I can give you another example of what happened. A Palestinian activist reached out to me, and she wanted to understand what progressive Jews were all about, Jews who thought differently from the Israeli government and the Jewish community. She always spoke of the Zionist community, not the Jewish community. And to her mind, the Jewish community was a Zionist community because she saw it as a replica of the Israeli government in Chile. And I believe that there are many in the current governing party and in the current administration, including even the president, who do not understand the fact that there can be a Jewish community with its own needs and interests and initiatives that have nothing to do with the state of Israel. They thought that the Jewish community was basically a spin-off of the Israeli government. So this means that we need new strategies. We need a new approach. There's a new president at the community. It's no longer Ariela. And I don't know whether there has been any strategic thinking about the needs imposed by the 21st century and its politics. We cannot stay in the 19th or 20th century in that regard. And finally, about Florinda's question, many young people who are in high school already are being provided with tools to go beyond Hasbara. Because Hasbara was for a long time their main tool in terms of enlightenment, right? But it was not in tune with the needs of the Chilean youth and attuned to the situation faced by young people, especially from when they graduate from the Jewish school and they go into public space to go into politics, to become students, university students, so they don't understand what happens in terms of student groups and university groups. And at times, there was some fear. There is fear in our youth, but there's also lack of interest in certain instances. We know that the Jewish communities, groups, the Tnuot, the youth groups, we always offer to give lectures, but they don't come. So there is a little bit of a mismatch there. Tools are offered to our youth, but they don't always understand how necessary they are. They don't always have to just study to go into university or just partying and drinking. That's not what life is about exclusively. And that they will face difficulties that they hadn't seen while at school. But there is a group of young people who are not in the Jewish school, and they're also being harassed. And complaints are filed, reports are filed, and that goes through different channels that I'm not privy to. So I think with that, I've answered all of your questions. Thank you, Valeria. Thank you so much. I believe you have indeed. And I dare close with the following comment. This is a very good time to draw comparative analysis about the manifestations in the different countries in Latin America, at least the largest countries in Latin America, of this trend. And of course, we'll hear about Brazil soon enough and what the answers are by the organized Jewish community and unaffiliated groups. For the first time, I see this very clearly because of the very thorny situation in Mexico and the comments and the debates that are so necessary and are undergoing, especially in the university setting, where a difference needs to be made. Just like we make a difference within the community of the different groups in terms of politics, sub-ethnic groups, and unaffiliated Jews. I mean, also include a wide variety of people, and there are statements by those who call themselves anti-Zionist, and what they criticize is not the government's policy, but rather the state of Israel. More compellingly. And then there are intellectual academics who are unaffiliated and have been critical of this leadership that has been overtaken by the circumstances. But most interestingly, and what we've seen in terms of the reactions by the community leadership in Danny Feinstein's presentation, where it was clearly said that the crisis has had a major impact on the community, and so they don't have the resources, and they're very focused on not going back to patterns of the early 20th century, but rather the beginnings of the immigration, having Jewish communities as welfare institutions to help those facing a financial crisis. And so the way that the requests for support are made and the criticism is level, I mean, that changes quite significantly. In private universities, it's easier for the community leadership to act than it is in public universities, although there is a difference there. Can we compare Boric to Milei and to the duo Lopez Obrador, Claudia Sheinbaum? I mean, that's very difficult. And it's difficult not to draw conclusions that we're all building and experiencing. So I'd like to thank you for this presentation. I would also like to thank the organizers for the time, and I am sorry I had uh, and it's very important that you spoke about discourse, and because it shows the images and tropas, and also the power of the Jewish community, its influence and ability to have an influence, even though they're very limited in terms of their responses. I'd like to thank all of you, and let me just say that this week we forgot that it was Pesach and Holy Week, and people are not at home and not necessarily willing to attend. So adults may know that these are urgent issues, but just like younger people, vacation time, uh, partying, celebrations, alcohol, of course, that has an impact. So thank you very much. Thank you, Valeria. Thank you, everyone, for always being here with us. And warm hugs to all of you. And we'll meet again in 2 weeks. Thank you, Judith, again. And thank you to the ISGAP team and to Sharona, who was our interpreter today. Excellent interpreter, Sharona. And Heidi has also done it before. They're both doing a stellar job. And we will have them uh, and their interpretation uh, has been recorded and will be used also for our future work. So thank you for your excellent work. And with that, thank you so much
Thank you, Edith.
and goodbye.
Bye.